So what? None of it matters.
For a change, let's introduce this one before I start waxing philosophical. And just to warn you, we're in for quite a lot of philosophical wax. Nier Automata is a freaky, brainy android nightmare brought to us by the hyperactive brain of Yoko Taro and the programming prowess of PlatinumGames, the character action gods among us. I've been a fan of Platinum since I played Bayonetta, and a fan of one of its founders, Hideki Kamiya, since childhood, although I may not have known who he was at the time I was slashing and juggling around as Dante, demon hunter extraordinaire, in the genre establishing Devil May Cry. However, I have to say right off the bat that in the case of Nier Automata, despite Platinum's pedigree, I don't find the actual moment-to-moment gameplay to be that interesting, though being compared to the likes of Bayonetta and Devil May Cry is hardly a fair competition. It's fine. Running around the modest open world is fine, the combination of hack and slash and asteroids of all things is fine, and actually works for me for the most part, but overall the combat is just an incredibly elaborate, deliberately under-designed means to an end. No, the main draw of Nier Automata for me is its unusual narrative, and the presentation of said story, which I'll naturally be focusing on here, particularly through the lens of something that happened to me before playing, and how it affected the very end of the game in a totally unexpected way. But let's go back to the beginning. Perhaps not the most exciting event in gaming for the year it was released, but it caused a fair amount of buzz for the ensuing 6 months or so. It wasn't the first place I'd heard about it, but I remember becoming particularly interested after listening to a certain podcast wherein the hosts were discussing their games of 2017. Nier Automata didn't make first place, but it was in the top 5. Most relevant to our discussion was the comment that the game said amazing things with the medium, and thus my expectations had been set. I'm a bit of a sucker for meta-narrative, or at least I was. The likes of Metal Gear Solid 2, and even the Stanley Parable and its maudlin follow-up The Beginner's Guide rank among my favourites growing up. If you've played Nier Automata, then you might have already realised my misinterpretation of the comment, but if not, I'll save that for later. The next inciting incident happened some months later whilst having a friend over for dinner. At a certain point the conversation turned to gaming and what we'd been playing recently, and as fate would have it, Tommy had been playing Nier Automata. He asked me if he could share something of his experience, in a fashion far more natural than this brief account is conveying, and I, not wanting to be awkward, said, go ahead. I think I should extend you all the same courtesy, so this is your last spoiler warning for the entire plot and endgame gameplay. He told me, without explicit plot details, that the end of the game had reduced him almost to tears, that the final level, after a brutal bullet hell, presents players with a choice of whether to erase all progress up to that point in order that your avatar help other players with the same struggle in some way. A noble, moving and somewhat real sacrifice. Suffice to say, this gave my friend a strong case of the feels. Intrigued by this revelation, and also quite keen to avoid further spoilers before experiencing the game myself, I made it a priority to play Nier Automata, if for no other reason than to exercise the demon of curiosity that Tommy's story had inspired. What followed was one of the more heady and above all emotionally transporting gaming experiences of the current generation. To summarise very, very briefly, the world, or at least the human civilization part of it, is over. Humans live in secret on the moon, meanwhile their android soldiers fight eternally and to all appearances fruitlessly against the confusingly named machines, a race of alien robots discourteous enough not to resemble humans, at least not physically, except as the game slowly reveals through its main plot as well as a number of wonderfully written side quests, they exhibit multiple sentient, complex, even intelligent, not to mention recognisably human behaviours. They laugh, they cry, they fall in love, they rush foolhardy into hopeless battle. As if as a counterpoint, the player characters 2B and 9S are positively robotic in their outlook, particularly the former, following orders and trying hard to think as little as possible about the broader meaning of their timidly genocidal actions, at least at first. Also, all the humans are dead. The androids are actually following an expired dogma of automated AI routines, lies and good old-fashioned prejudices. This naturally leads to the question, what is their revered humanity actually for? Sure, they were made in the image of their creators, but their creators have long since abandoned them, admittedly by dying, but abandoned all the same. Poor androids. Built to kill, programmed to feel emotions but conditioned through culture not to express them. If they can't partake in the meaningful aspects of the human experience, why are they here on, or around, Earth at all? Particularly while a hive-mind race of spare parts seem for the most part to be experiencing a broad range of emotions. What does humanity actually mean in a post-human world? And at the end of the day, what is it actually worth? It's a worryingly small leap to the much heavier question of what is or was the point of human existence at all. Meanwhile, as befits such a lofty, terrifying question, the game is chock full of not so subtle references to major worldviews and philosophical heavyweights of post-Enlightenment human history, exemplified mostly by the machines and their not inhuman tribes, characters who are direct name drops, as well as the factions and groups that the machines splinter into. You've got the innocently hedonistic ones, the hereditary monarchy ones, the peaceful thinky ones, and the maniac religious ones, more than a few highlights from the political and emotional history of humans. We're well past the spoiler wall, so suffice to say nothing ends particularly well for any of these groups in the world of Nier Automata. Except the circus, I think they're fine right up to the end. Maybe there's a lesson for us there. All the same, it's a deliberate evocation of man's own folly. It's adorable and thought-provoking to see intelligent beings, purpose-made ones at that, fall into the same fallacies and dependencies that we have over the years. Not to satisfy any physical need, but for their intellectual, or at least emotional health. Their artificiality doesn't hold them back from experiencing what life has to offer them. And one of our main narrative threads involves our androids coming to grips with this fact and its implications for their own existence. Part of the reason I found Nier Automata so engaging was that I was already there with regards to the machine's homegrown humanity. As game players, we are all already there, perfectly able to project our own emotions and feelings onto digital puppets and imagined characters, their inherent unreality irrelevant. Then we have the oblique individual references to great thinkers. The most relevant to the story is the leader of the pacifist village Pascal, historically most famous, apart from a shit ton of important mathematics, for his wager that it's better to act as if Christian God is real, even if you're unsure, as the penalty for non-compliance is potentially far worse than just living well and lying in the ground and being quiet forever. Quite how this relates to our Pascal's total adherence to pacifism is by no means direct. Certainly Blaise Pascal would have been an advocate of good old Catholic clemency, but there is not much evidence that he was into living a conflict-free existence in the woods. That said, his general esteem and appreciation for human beings make this an okay fit. More perplexing still is Giant Engels. The real Engels was famously the live-in life partner of one Karl Marx, and together on a dark and stormy night they conceived the unpopular economic philosophy of communism. Despite how this is relevant to the non-transforming transformer come paraplegic robot accepting the bad things he's done and dying peacefully is also a mystery. But I guess he's cool with you using his stuff when he's done with it. Is this socialism? The insane machine pope is called Kierkegaard. Though a deeply religious existentialist with some kinda dark worldviews, a suicidal leader of a death cult, he was not. Nier Automata doesn't take particular inspiration from the philosophers it mentions. It's more of a superficial seasoning, an odd garnish, but at least it makes you think in other ways, and overall it's smarter than a lot of games. No one is impressed by your trite chosen one plot Skyrim. Then there's 2B herself, who, despite appearing prominently on the box art and in the marketing, is rather more of a typical video game protagonist than Nier Automata needs to carry its heavy themes. From the start to the end, we're essentially documenting the android's slow descent into glorious nihilism, but 2B is basically already there. She does her best impression of Top Gun, kicks some ass, and then dies an ungracious, sudden and rather pointless death, euthanized to prevent a nasty computer virus from spreading to our more sympathetic protagonists. No, the main thrust of the narrative arc, disjointed and onanistic as it is centered on 9S, the whinier and more inclined to Gallagher of the two, and the gradual but irrevocable erosion of his worldviews and all that he holds dear. By the time 2B bites it, the android base on the moon is already gone, another casualty of a pointless, endless conflict, leaving an already quite insane 9S to storm the apparent enemy stronghold, in a vain attempt to do something. He, like the player, surely feels a strong urge to bring this drama to a conclusion, and while it seems that the virus got to him after all, pushing him to violence, really it's the game that needs this final battle. The characters' metal hearts really aren't in it. But this isn't so much a comment on video games like the ending of MGS2 or the good bit of Bioshock, as it is an utter disregard for meaning itself, leaning in fact pretty far into the nihilism it flirted with earlier. There is nothing, and after an unnecessary fight or two, everybody is dead and everything is ruined. And then, the final ending starts, and gracefully it's quite the subversion of the nasty emptiness that endings C and D are peddling. I already laid it out for the most part, and I'll leave this one part unexpressed, but it's hopeful. Gamey as all hell, but successful at translating intense, overwhelming gameplay into an emotional finale. I see now that I misheard or misinterpreted the idea that this was a comment on the nature of video games themselves, a meta-commentary. I see now that the guy simply meant that Nier Automata is a fantastic game, able to take advantage of its medium to tell a story that could only work in this medium, something I agree with. It's not unique in this way, just a solid example. But all this, as well as my own ending to the game, got me thinking about spoilers. We all have expectations and assumptions going into new experiences, even if we like to think we don't. It's how our brains work, we can't help but anticipate. useful for staying alive in the savannah, believe it or not. And obviously past experience is the only thing jumping around up there. The pleasure of new experience comes from having those expectations proved wrong. But if someone comes along and tells you exactly what to expect, it's like they've sucked all of the juice out of the plump peach you were about to eat. Spoiled. People are understandably very touchy about spoilers because they want that opportunity to be surprised, and particularly for games to feel that sense of discovery. My question then is, when can that expectation, that anticipation of things to come, be used to heighten an experience? What I'm describing is called foreshadowing when used within the context of a particular work, but most if not all foreshadowing from outside something is almost always cast from negative to neutral. I've genuinely come to think that a little context and a firm idea of a destination only heightened my experience of Nier Automata, particularly during its stranger, more meandering parts. I've reached the end of this mental jaunt and not come to a firm conclusion, but it's definitely something I have to think about when trying to discuss games in a way that won't make them worse for someone who hasn't played them yet. But we're at the end, and here's the final twist, one last joke. I was in the climax. I had been helped by other sacrifices and I'd finally pushed through the madness. I'd arrived at the foreshadowed critical choice. I was ready to delete all my save data so that my little robot friend could go and help someone else finish their journey. But I didn't, because I was never offered. The game popped me back into the menu after the credits for the absurd reason that it didn't have PS Plus, and with no valid internet connection to the service or to other players, the game had made that decision for me. And I still have all my save data. I'm not just that asshole, I swear. I was hoping to try and mentally spin this into something accidentally profound, but I just can't. It was weird. A full stop after an ending so full of hope and possibility. In spite of this, I found it incredibly moving, ambiguous, emotional, and just plain weird. Perhaps appropriate in a game about false purpose and finding your own reasons and logic for continuing your own life. At the end of it all was just me having an intense emotional experience by myself. What do you know, I did it after all. Quick shout out to Ninja Brian over here for embodying the most important lesson, that a little levity is almost never amiss.